In this session of Tyler's VersaTrans TripTracker, we're going to take a look at requesting a field trip. This screen is set up just for a requester to request field trips for a particular school. So your screen may look different than this based on your user privileges and login information. On the left side of the screen, we notice the trip request summary area. This tells us the number of trips that are scheduled today and then those that are scheduled for this week. On the right-hand side, we see system messages. Any important messages that we need to pay attention to would be listed here. In order to request a trip, we need to go to the top left corner of our screen and click on Request a Trip. When we click on the Request a Trip, we can now fill in the rest of the information regarding our field trip. You'll notice the status of the trip currently is unsubmitted, and you can see over here to the right that we have the trip details and trip estimate. We'll come back to the trip estimate. First, we need to go ahead and we need to fill in the trip name, and we're going to say it's a third graders going to the pumpkin patch. The next thing that we need to do is identify the trip date. So we can either type that in or we can select it from the calendar. In this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and choose it from the calendar. After we do that, we need to next fill in the trip type. When we click on the trip type, we see the options that are available there, and we'll choose the one that's most appropriate. In this particular case, it's a standard trip, so that's what we'll make as our selection. Next, we need to identify the activity type. In this particular case, it's going to be an educational trip, and you'll select from the choices available in your case. Here we have the reason for the trip. This is an optional field and isn't required to be filled in order to submit a trip. However, you'll want to follow your school's district's policies regarding requesting field trips if this is something that may be required on their part. However, we're going to leave this blank since we don't need to provide any further information. We're going to go down to the account area here, and we can see that Adams Elementary comes up as the account. Since I'm a requester for Adams Elementary, that's the account that defaults. However, if there was more than one trip, we'd click on the drop down and we would see that there are more than one account that I could request field trips for. There isn't, so it's Adams Elementary. The requester name is automatically filled in because of my login information since I am able to request trips for this school. So that information is filled in. Next we have our account notes, which provide any additional information for the field trip. We can see that we need the bus to arrive 10 minutes before and be on the north side of the building. Below that, we need to identify where our trip is going to begin at. So the origin is Adams Elementary at the school. And then we're going to need to identify the departure and return date. And you can see that these are already filled in based on the trip date that we previously filled in. That leaves us with filling in the departure time and the return time. So we're going to type in the departure time here. We're going to say that we're going to depart at 10 a.m. and then we're going to say that we're going to return at 2:30 p.m. Once we've identified the times of the trip, we need to go to the destination and identify where the trip is going. So in this case, we'll click on the drop down and we're looking for the pumpkin patch, and there we see Fairfield Pumpkin Patch, so we're going to make that selection. Our arrival and departure dates for the pumpkin patch are listed here, and again they're pre-filled out based on the trip date. Since it's not overnight, it will display both of those dates. Now we need to just fill in the times for the arrival and the time for the departure. Well, we know that it takes about 10 minutes to get to that location, so we're going to put in 10:10 is what time we're going to actually arrive. And then since we need to return by 2:30, we're going to go ahead and say 2:20 as our departure time. Now, if for some reason your trip is not, or your destination is not available for your trip, from the drop down over here on the right hand side, you can click on the click here to add a new location. Add in the location's name, and then that will become available in the destination area. However, be sure to follow any district policy regarding naming convention or adding new destinations to your field trip information. Okay, now that we've selected that, we need to add it to our field trip. So we're going to click Add, and this will put our destination information below in this box here, and we can see that it's now been added. If for some reason you had a situation where a bus would be taking two groups of students to a location, but they're going to be separate locations, we could put multiple destinations in here. And that would allow the field trip to go from one place to the next place and then do the reverse if it's a return trip as well. In this case, we're only going to one place. We're just going to the pumpkin patch, so we're going to leave that as it is. Next, we need to fill in the number of individuals that are going to be on the buses for the field trip. So we're going to have 4 adults and we're going to have 130 students. We don't have any wheelchairs, so we're going to leave that blank. And because we're going to have about 65 students per bus, that's going to require 2 buses. So we're going to put in 2 vehicles here. If we had any special accommodations, we'd also check this box, and we don't in this particular case, so we're going to leave it blank. Next, we're going to fill in the contact name. So this would be the teacher or the coach. So we're going to put in Jim Smith here, and then we're going to put in his phone number. That way we have contact information if for some reason the driver needs to reach that person or transportation. Then we can put any notes that may pertain to John Smith or something that he may want to have conveyed regarding the field trip. We don't in this particular case, so we're actually ready to submit our trip. Now before we do, we're going to click on the trip estimate. Now you can do a trip estimate after you submit the trip, but if you want to check out costs before you actually do the trip, then I would suggest you go to trip estimate next. In this particular case, it's going to bring up the screen giving our trip information that we've already filled in. We want an estimation of this trip. We're going to have to fill in the estimated distance. Now keep in mind, this is an estimation. Transportation charges will be based on actual miles and time. So we know that it's about 4.5 miles. So we're going to put in 9 miles for our distance. And then our time calculations show us the breakdown of how long the driver's driving, how long they're sitting, and if they were to be overnight, we'd identify that as well. So we see the time calculation here is already done for us. And then the lower half of the screen are any estimated expenses beyond the normal trip, such as tolls, meals, and parking. Now we are going to go ahead and say there is a $5 fee for parking. So I want to add that into the cost. Once we've got those pieces filled in, we can now click the calculate button and it will update the information. And we can see the total cost of our trip now. So once we've got this identified, something else that we're able to do is we're going to go to the Open Trip Directions and Mapping tool, because maybe we're off on our distance and we want to just make sure. So we can click on Open Trip Directions and Mapping tool, and this is actually going to bring in the information. Now since we already have our building set up as well as our destination, we just click on the Calculate Directions, and this is actually going to create directions for us. And we can see here that it goes from the school, which is our A, and if we look over here in our little map, we can see the school location. And then we get the directions, and then we can see B, which is our destination, is over here. And we can see that our estimation of 9 miles was good because it's 4.2 miles. We can go ahead and print this if we want a copy of it, and we can clear the calculations. And we can return to the trip request screen. So we click on return to the trip request screen, and there's our estimate still. We're done with that, so we're going to go ahead and click on trip details, and we are actually now ready to submit our trip. So the last step of the process is to submit the trip. So we click on submit trip, and it says you cannot schedule a trip within the PM time threshold. You would get this kind of message if there were limitations on vehicle availability. So the case may be that our particular trip needs to occur a little sooner because we don't have buses that are going to be available. So we're going to say that our trip can return at 1 p.m. So then of course we need to adjust our times. So we're going to go ahead and remove our destination. And we're going to reselect it. And our 10:10 time didn't change in the morning. However, our afternoon time did change, and we're going to go ahead and put 12:50 p.m. We'll add that in there. We can see it is added with the new times, and everything else remains filled in for us, so all we need to do is now click Submit. And we can tell at the top of our screen that our trip has been successfully submitted and is ready to go. We'll also notice that at the top left screen that our status is now at a requested stage, so it's waiting to be approved. If for some reason we need to clone this trip, rather than filling in all the blanks again, we could clone it. So let's say we have another group that's going to be going to the pumpkin patch. We could fill that information in by cloning the particular trip. And then, of course, we can see directions or trip history as well. The trip is now requested and waiting for approval. And that's how you request a trip in Tyler's Versatrans Trip Tracker.